Hi, my name is Karina. Thank you all for joining. I'm still probably gonna troubleshoot a little bit because I have to figure out how to put my presentation on here, but I have so much that I want to cover. I told Allie that I really think visuals are going to be important because there is a lot of information that I want to cover. A lot of the things that I learned about the topic today, which is going to be learning how to identify our survival mechanisms. So a lot of people are familiar with the 4 Fs, which is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. My goal for today is to help us identify how those can manifest in the body. So that we can feel more empowered with how to identify it within us, and hopefully help identify it in others to help others in their own journeys as well. Today, I also hope to maybe discuss a little bit of breath work, because this is how I learned a little bit more about how to manage some of these things. Let me see if I can get this visual going, and then we'll get officially started. All right, everybody. Thank you again for your patience. Thank you again for hanging out for a little bit until I was able to organize myself. Um, I I definitely want to go into this again or teach this class again. This will be my trial run. My workshop is called The Way of Resilience, Harnessing the Force Within. Just like we've already discussed a little bit about, I really feel like our breath is part of what connects us to ourselves. It's one of the few things that we have control over, and something that connects us not only to our subconscious, it's something that we could do subconsciously, but also consciously. So it gives us access to a lot of stored emotions, stress in our bodies. That's what we're going to go into today. But there's a few things that I wanted to go over before we jump into the 4 Fs. This is a lot of, like I said, this is a lot of the training that I received as a breath worker with somatic release. So I will be kind of teaching or explaining a lot of what I've learned with Stephen Jaggers. Uh, I just click. So Stephen said a beautiful quote that I would like to explain here is, your nervous system is the electric network of your being. Over time, unresolved trauma or chronic stress, dysregulation of this network. When dysregulated, difficulties in your personal or professional life may arise. When you heal trauma and stress, you heal the electrical network of your nervous system. When you heal your nervous system, you heal the emotional self so your authentic self can emerge. A lot of somatic breath work is based on becoming in tune with your body. So part of what I like to define is somatic. So defining somatic, somatic or soma is derived from the ancient Greek word for body. But something that I think is really beautiful is that the ancient Greeks didn't just distinguish between the body, but they didn't distinguish between body, mind, and spirit. It encompasses all as one. Soma really means the entirety of living in our wholeness, or our humanness. And I thought that was so beautiful when I learned that. But really, when we're talking about somatic, we're talking about the whole of us, who we are. Um, uh, we're not just our physical bodies. We have spiritual aspects, a mental aspect, an emotional aspect, and each aspect carries wisdom and has their own unique language. So the more that we learn to listen, the more we can understand. Humans are sensitive creatures. We are born to sense the world. It's our birthright. The more sensitive we are, the more alive we can be. But with time, chronic stressors can activate instinctive defense responses, or those survival mechanisms, which can numb our ability to feel the full spectrum. Sometimes we numb ourselves to the point of what feels like a living death. And that is because when we cut ourselves from feeling, we stop ourselves from feeling not just the lows, but our highs as well. Our body cannot distinguish whether positive or negative emotions. So when we try to suppress negative emotions, we are automatically already covering the good, the love inside of us. So a lot of that times it feels like a living death when we stop sensing and we become numb to the world. Stephen likes to say something too that really was also very profound for me, that numbness is an active process, meaning that it drains our nervous system. It drains our nervous system's energy to maintain that state of numbness. This process has been referred to as parasitic tension. It takes more energy from our nervous system to repress or suppress, because feeling and sensing is our natural state. And so the first step to healing is to connect our minds back to our bodies. We must learn to remember ourselves. For the context of understanding stress, he says that it's helpful to it's helpful, or it's useful to imagine the nervous system. The nervous system's primary function is to learn new adaptive patterns for survival. So stress is the question to our being, and it becomes traumatic if the question's not answered. If the question's answered, it becomes or manifests as growth. So the new development of a new adaptive pattern. But when the question isn't answered, it creates symptoms of chronic defense systems in our body. So in other words, stress is not what happens to you. Stress is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So everybody, it's a subjective experience. So what might be stressful to me might not be stressful to you. These responses are intelligent defense systems from our nervous system, designed to protect us from feeling the events that might have been too much for us to handle. At first, these defense mechanisms can be helpful, can help us during the situation to cope in the moment, but over time, it can become maladaptive. Jagger also likes to say that the past is not what happened to you yesterday. The past is what stayed from what happened yesterday. So same thing, which was pretty much the same, what he quotes here. But these defense responses that remain active in our soma, or our body or our being, becomes a disorder, a trauma that prevents us from being present. So the past freezes in our present and begins to create our future. So unresolved past defenses become our fate. Our subconscious, or our soma and psyche, tend to shape our decisions without us being aware of it, meaning that one has no choice to make the decisions because it's not a conscious choice. Conscious awareness creates free will, meaning that if we aren't aware of how these manifest, it is most of our time we're functioning, making decisions from our subconscious. Like I mentioned, for today's class, I would like to empower each and every one of you with the knowledge to help you identify these defenses or survival mechanisms in yourself and others. So that we can be a little bit closer to being able to decide how we want to respond and handle stressors in life. But before we go into discussing the 4 Fs, fight, flight, fear, and fawn, I would like to open up the room just to make sure that the first part of this made sense, or if there's any questions about it. I'm more than willing to answer. I think I might have raised a little bit too fast in that, so the language can be a little bit confusing. So please, if anybody has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. I'm gonna check the I'm gonna check the the chat to see if I missed something. Let's see who's in here. And this is an active process. Yeah, so far so good. Okay.
Yeah, so far so good. I'm understanding too.
Oh yeah, good. All right. Yeah, I'm excited to have you guys in here. And
I do actually want to quickly test something because you're in the
yeah,
spotlight, but I don't know if you can recognize hand gestures if they come up.
can someone raise their hand so I can see?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that right now. Raise hand.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. So that does work. Yay.
Yay.
Okay, you can keep going.
All right, cool. Thank you. Let me see. Can I move this over here? Let me move this over here. Okay. Oh. Okay. So let's get back into this. So for us as Jedi, self-awareness is in the Jedi compass. So this is why I decided to take this to teach. Self-awareness is something that has really made a difference in how I show up as a Jedi. There is no ignorance, is knowledge. Really anchored me in making sure that I'm not the mystery. Nobody else can know me more than I can know myself. Um, and so I'm just going to quote what's in the Jedi Compass really quickly. So in the Jedi Compass, self-awareness interior says a Jedi strives to be in touch with their own emotions, drives, and inner workings, and how they affect those around them. They learn of their flaws and seek to overcome them, as well as learning of their strengths and seeking to amplify those. A Jedi knows that every action has consequences, no matter how tiny or insignificant those actions may seem. Therefore, a Jedi must be aware of how their actions echo off the actions of others. Jedi are aware that being in harmony with the Force helps them understand the implications of their actions. So as Jedi, we recognize the importance of understanding and mastering our survival mechanisms. These instincts deeply ingrained in our beings are part of our shared human experience. In our journey towards becoming true Jedi, we learn to navigate these responses with mindfulness and purpose. So With our survival mechanisms or our defense mechanisms, are commonly categorized in these four primary responses, often refers to as the four Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These responses are part of the body's innate survival instincts and are activated in the face of perceived threat and dangers. Sometimes that could just be stress. The first one we will go into is the fight response. The fight response. This response involves confronting a perceived threat or danger. It is characterized by increased energy, readiness for action, and a heightened state of arousal. The fight response is associated with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the parts that activate our heart rate, that increase our breathing. But I'll go into that in a moment. I'm just going to cover the four Fs first, just so we know what we're talking about when we go into them. The flight response. The flight response involves avoiding or escaping from a threat. It is characterized by an increased heart rate, rapid breathing, a strong urge to flee the situation. Like the fight response, it is also associated with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The freeze response. The freeze response is characterized by a state of immobility and heightened alertness. In situations where fight or flight may not be possible or effective, the body may enter a freeze state as a way to minimize the chances of being detected by a predator or a threat. Sometimes that is also associated with our sympathetic response. And the last one is not commonly known. So this is why one of the ones that I really like to talk about, because that is one of the ones that gave me a lot of insight to my own responses, because this is one of mine, actually. It was one of my primary ones. So the fawn response involves seeking to please or appease others in order to minimize the threat. It often includes behaviors such as compliance, submission, and seeking approval. The fawn response is a social survival strategy and sometimes considered an extension of the freeze response. So for the fight discussion, I threw a little bit of a couple of things, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with it. As we said, the fight response is the response that involves confronting perceived threat or danger. It is characterized by the increased energy, readiness for action, and heightened state of arousal, which is that sympathetic nervous system. So some physical signs can be increased heart rate. The heart becomes to accelerate, pumps more blood, deriving oxygen and nutrients to muscles and vital organs, so that we can become ready for combat. Rapid breathing, so again, so that oxygen can go where it needs to. Muscle tension, so that we can prepare for quick, forceful movements. Dilated pupils helps improve a vision focus on the threat. Sweating is also one of them. The body sweats as a cooling mechanism during increased physical activity, so the body starts to prepare us to engage in that fight response. Shaking or trembling is another one too. Tremors, again, that muscle tension. Dry mouth is also one of them. Digestive changes too. Sometimes we'll lose our hunger because our body is getting ready to engage in fighting. And even sometimes we can also see like reduced pain and perception. So those are um, a few physical how the fight response can manifest as a physical side. I want to open the discussion really quickly just to discuss the physical signs, and then we'll move on to the other ones. But I just wanted to open up to see if anybody else can think about physical sensations of how that manifests in the body, um, for you.
I had never heard of the fawn response, but it
Yeah, I'm
makes
so excited to talk about
sense. It
it.
makes so much sense for how I negotiate conflict. You know, the whole people pleasing, well, if I don't do anything wrong, then nobody can help hate me and I'll be fine. It's
Yeah,
never the
yeah.
it, yeah, I appreciate that. I learned so much, really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'm
So
so
much.
excited to jump into the fawn discussion. But do you have any experience with the fight or how it manifests in your own body when you engage in that, or you don't engage in fight at all?
Um, I do get like a little irritated. I do, but I don't feel like I do a lot of the physical. I might experience the physical signs, but I feel like I don't push it out. Like, I
Yeah.
let it kind of be in there.
Yeah, the same. Manifesting the fight response in my body has always been very difficult, which is why part of learning how to identify it is also recognizing that it isn't just like a physical manifestation. A lot of it is also derived from our emotions. So I put a couple of emotions on there. Anger is easily the one that can trigger a fight response. Is anger is a primary emotion associated with the fight response, and energizes and motivates individuals to confront or overcome a threat. So that is one of the main ones that can be seen with the fight response. Irritation is also another one, a milder form, but that can also, irritation can start to build up in our bodies, frustration, aggression, um, assertiveness, but not every fight response is negative. Determination can also help us. This is when we start learning how to maybe work in our survival mechanisms when we feel those are activated, because courage, confidence, determination, all of those can also manifest during the fight response. Um, so if we can become aware of how our bodies start to manifest, we can change them so that we can transmute them to something more positive that can serve us versus having that take over us. And just wanted to discuss a little bit too about some behavioral stuff that you could potentially see. So assertive behavior can kind of be seen with that. Um, Sometimes it can be more a confrontational stance, um, verbal aggression can be a part of it, readiness to confront, um, like you're ready to go in there, whether it's like a person or situation or a challenge, defensive postures, or engagement in conflict. If your fight response is activated, maybe you go and look for a fight to engage in, or it doesn't even have to be physical. It could just be an argument you engage in with somebody else. Like um, but again, not everything. Our fight response can also help us challenge our fairness when we feel like we've been wronged in a way. Um, and something that we can also feel during the fight response would be like increased energy or agitation. Um, but it is it is so important for us to recognize this response when it activates in our body. Um, Recognizing this instinct is crucial, yet genuine strength is found in mastering it. The fight responses ought to be disciplined, concentrated reaction grounded in purpose and justice. Skills hold in combat are instruments, not manifestations of anger. It is imperative to channel that energy into deliberate action, defending others with compassion. It's vital to bear in mind that a Jedi's mission is to protect, not to pursue vengeance, and should only use force when absolutely necessary. So one of the ways that I wanted to kind of rephrase or look at it in a Jedi's perspective, the fight response is also channeling the warrior within. Our fight response, surge of energy and strength, is a manifestation of the warrior spirit within us. As Jedi, we channel this energy not for personal aggression, but for the defense of others and greater good. Combat skills become tools for protection, guided by our ethical principles. So again, I'll kind of open the floor just to talk about the fight response. We will talk and engage about the other ones as we move through it. But specifically, I wanted to open the floor for the fight response to allow anybody to share how it manifests in their body, and to see also to discuss what works for others when they engage for fight response, or what helps them. But yeah, I don't know if anybody had any questions or wanted to say anything about specifically about the fight response.
Sorry, it took a minute for me to unmute. Um, one of the best things that I learned, because I go through yearly, actually bi-yearly trainings for this one in particular. Wow, I just blinked. I'm not awake yet. Why do you ask a very technical question? So one of the things that, because I work a lot with nonverbal individuals, and as part of our trainings too, there are 4 things to look for when you are dealing with some kind of fight response. Nonverbal communication is communication. And I deal with a lot of people that are aggressive, property damage, attack people, very violent. And there's 4 things to look at. So it's a communication piece. And let's see if I remember all 4 of them, because I don't have my training right in front of me. You are not hearing me. I am not being heard. I am fearful. I feel threatened. I am in pain. And there is a 4th one, and I'm blanking. I always get the 4th one.
Those are really good.
I'm sorry?
I said those are all still really good. Thank you.
They are. In whatever argument that I see, like even on Facebook, and I see a back and forth going on, my first response is to try to look at what's not being said. So why is it that this person is arguing? Maybe it's because they don't feel heard. Maybe it's because they feel threatened. Maybe it is because, oh, you're not understanding what I'm saying, like I'm not communicating properly. And all of these things are usually a fight response, like aggression is usually a fight response, obviously, because the title is fight response. But it's not always meaning to be aggressive. It's usually because the person feels a certain way and the other person's not getting the symbols correctly. So the way that you can see it is, pacing back and forth, the raising of the voice, right? you're not hearing me, so now I got to get your attention. So I'm going to start doing things that is going to get your attention because I am trying to communicate with that. I am in pain in some way, shape, or form. And I think that that training has been so ingrained in my head because usually when we see a fight response, we take it as this person is trying to fight us.
Mm.
And in reality, it is a subconscious that, hey, I may not actually be trying to fight with you. I am trying to communicate something with you, and the communication's not working properly. A lot of the aggression with nonverbal communication, I'll take autism as a example. A lot of people with autism, they have very high pain tolerance. They can actually communicate that they are in pain. But sometimes it could be because they have a toothache, or it is because they have sensory issues. So there's too much stuff going on here and I don't know how to respond to it. And I am very, very overwhelmed. And as a result, I might hit you if you get too close, right? But we see that as aggression, and we don't actually look at what is causing that aggression. And for a lot of us, when you find yourself in an argument and you see that that person is getting verbally aggressive, you need to ask yourself, what is it that this person is trying to communicate? It's not what they are saying. If they are saying, I don't like that you are on the phone all the time, what they're actually trying to say is that you're not paying attention to me. I'm not getting the attention that I feel like that I deserve. If you are in a conversation and the person says, hey, listen, I told you to leave me alone and you're not leaving me alone. What is it that they are trying to say? It means that they want to be left alone, right? They're actually telling you that, but what is it? Because it's coming off as aggressive. So you are responding to that aggression. But in reality, it's like, hey, listen, I just want to be by myself and you're not respecting my boundary. So those fight responses, like the trainings that I have to do to talk about those 4 things in particular, it is a training that's 2 days long.
Yeah.
You know, it talks about the nonverbal communication. So how is it, you know, if you're person to person, right? And the person is kind of like, you get a little bit too close and then they do one of these, like that body language, you know, it very fascinating training, but just kind of wanted to throw those things out there that usually when you see that, then yeah, usually when you see that fight response, it's not actually them trying to fight. It's actually them trying to protect themselves, but they're trying to communicate something that you're not catching on.
Yes, thank you so much. That is so important. Thank you for bringing that up, Sarah. It is so wonderful to really put that message out there, because most of the time, a lot of these responses that manifest in our body are other messages that our body is trying to tell us, or our mind. We just don't always have the consciousness. So this is why I'm hoping that by learning a little bit about each and every one of us can empower us a little bit more, of giving us more understanding of ourselves than others. But like Sarah said, a lot of these just 4 things can be so in depth, and I could literally spend, like she said, like the training for just for those things can be multiple days, but I'm trying to condense it a little bit here, just to make sure that everybody can learn a little bit about it, becoming like the beginning of the seminar, the workshop. It is through identifying or being able to become conscious of how it manifests in the body that empowers us for us to decide how we want to show up. If we don't know it, we don't have choice. Consciousness is what allows us to have choice. So for the next one, then I will go into the fight or the flight response. The Flight response again, it involves avoiding or escaping from a threat. It is characterized by increased heart rate, rapid breathing, and strong urge to flee the situation. Like the fight response, it is also associated with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So a lot of the physical manifestations are very similar to the fight response, where we see increased heart rate, rapid breathing, muscle tension, dilated pupils, sweating, shaking and trembling, dry mouth. But the emotions behind it can vary and be different. One of the main ones would be fear instead of anger, how I was in flight. So with fear, it's usually one of the primary emotions that trigger the flight response. It alerts an individual to like potential danger and motivates them to seek safety through escape. Anxiety can also manifest it or accompanies the flight response, kind of reflecting the anticipation of a threat and still the body's readiness to avoid it or to move away. Nervousness, increased state of unease or apprehension commonly experienced when the flight response is activated, worry, usually concerns about like potential dangers or urgency to avoid them, apprehension, restlessness, fidgeting, impatience can also manifest that way, or uneasiness, dread, or panic can also manifest as the flight response as emotions. Some of the behaviors that we can see is obviously fleeing, or escape or avoiding the threat, moving away, increased movement, fidgeting again, or movement, wanting to move away from the perceived threat or the stressor, or withdrawal, avoiding eye contact, and like I said, fleeing. And with the fight response again, what I like to kind of think of as Jedi, if we can harness it, become aware of it, our flight response can be a strategic retreat. The flight response urging us to escape perceived threats aligns with the wisdom of strategic retreat. As Jedi, we learn to discern when to step back, not out of fear, but to assess, regroup, and return with a clearer mind. Our retreat is a calculated move rooted in the pursuit of balance. So I'd like to open up the floor again now to talk about the flight response, to see if anybody would like to, if this is one that they're familiar with, one that they experience, or would like to share any thoughts that came up regarding the flight response, how it manifests in their own body. Feel free to chime in to impart any knowledge you might like to at this time. All right. Fine.
So, okay, I think this one's one that a lot of Jedi are, or someone who is very Jedi minded might feel in their heart that they are lesser because they flight when they get into a situation that is difficult. We hear a lot of people tell us, Jedi are supposed to fight for justice and we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to do that. And then if we run away, we didn't respond. And this is very similar with freeze. freeze would have the same thing. But we need to recognize that these are very physical responses. We can't just push our way through them easily. We are, we have to forgive ourselves when we enter a flight or a freeze response. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really important to recognize that the flight response doesn't indicate weakness. It gives us a moment to reassess, to move away, and it's very valid. And a lot of these emotions or responses are also autonomic, meaning we don't always have the choice of what we do, and we should give ourselves grace with how they manifest in our bodies. Because the first step is always becoming aware of it. You can't change what you're not aware of.
And also, it's important to remember that if it wasn't working before, we wouldn't still be doing it. Like anything, I don't know how to explain it, but like, it previously was working. That's why behaviors happen, because somehow it saved you. So allowing that, you've been good so far. I mean, this is a good thing, but this I'm gonna try. Another thing I'm gonna try. Like you said, give yourself some grace.
Yeah, exactly. And fleeing, I mean, that can manifest in multiple, I mean, like evading a dangerous situation or moving away from like a natural disaster. Like there's multiple reasons or how this could be a beneficial. Even like avoiding like a social gathering, if it's too much, like that's okay, like to remove yourself from what is activating you. But thank you so much for chiming in. We'll continue moving now that somebody brought up the freeze response because it is a little similar. The freeze response is characterized by the state of immobility or a heightened alertness. In situations where fight or flight may not be possible or effective, the body may enter a freeze state or a way to minimize the chances of being detected by a predator or a threat. Some physical signs can be like immobility. An individual may feel like physically still or freeze in place as a response of the perceived threat. Muscle tension or rigidity in preparation to kind of assess what's going on. Shallow breathing may start occurring at this point too. The freeze response often involves a reduction of the respiratory rate of the body to minimize movement. So holding breath can sometimes happen here. Decreased heart rate. That's more of the general slowing down of the physiological process. And numbness. Some individuals may experience sensations of numbness or tingling, particularly in extremities, which can be the result from the body's stress response affecting the blood flow and nerve function. Some emotional signs would be like fear and anxiety, similarly like the flight response. Although the freeze response may not be visibly expressive as the fight or flight, there's still underlying sense of fear and anxiety, hypervigilance, heightened awareness on the focus on the perceived threat, characterized an emotional aspect of the freeze response, difficulty speaking, again, minimizing the mobility to be detected. So some people might find it challenging to speak or express verbally during when the freeze response gets triggered. Like behavioral, that would be like immobility, staying still, or staring fixedly at a perceived threat. Avoiding eye contact could be another one. Kind of like the strategy to go unnoticed. The inability to escape would be, again, that rigidity of the perceived threat contributing to the decision to stay still. Cognitive disorientation can also happen with the freeze response. because we get frozen in time, so our ability to think and slow down can be affected. So a person may struggle to process information or make decisions in that moment. Time distortion can also happen. A perception of time may be altered during the freeze response. Time may seem to pass more slowly or inconsistently as the individual or us as we go through it. It's important to recognize that the freeze response is natural and adaptive to a threat, allowing the individual to assess what's going on and potentially to avoid harm. For us as Jedi, I like to think of it as the mindful presence. The freeze response, a moment of stillness, is an opportunity for mindful presence. Instead of being paralyzed by our fear, we use this moment to gather our thoughts, connect with the force, and choose our actions wisely. It becomes a moment of strategic reflection. So when we can become aware of how those manifestations show up in our body, we can create that conscious decision to use those moments if we feel it get triggered to think through our responses. But yeah, I also wanted to open up the floor again with the freeze response to see if I think there was a couple people that mentioned a little bit about the freeze, but wanted to open the floor again to discuss how maybe it manifested in somebody else, in their body, or situations that they experience, the freeze response. And there, otherwise I can share a few of mine of how I've experienced it.
So, I just kind of want to, because I was holding back just a little bit on the freeze.
Thank you.
This one has actually come up before, and historically, I have known that someone was judged for freezing. And that's kind of why I mentioned the, give yourself grace. But I also want to put in here that as Jedi, I would hope that, we've kind of grown beyond that. But for anybody that's listening who's upset or is saying, oh no, a Jedi can't freeze, give, not just give yourself grace, but we need to give other people grace for not responding. And especially if someone is not responding to our situation and you feel like, oh, I'm the only person that ever fights for myself. When you're in a crisis and don't get upset at your friend or at someone else because you hear that they freeze. Give other people grace. So the first one was give yourself grace when you flight. This one's going to be give other people grace. Okay, I am complete.
Yeah, the freeze response is something that I've also experienced. I'm glad that you brought the guilt up because it is something that I've personally felt. But I give myself grace because it's the initial response, being able to identify it, then I can use it. I can relax. I'm like, okay, this is what my body is experiencing now. I can have choice how I want to move forward. But it is through our training that hopefully we can grow into learning different behaviors to how to manifest or change, become a little bit more adaptive when we do experience that initial freeze, shock to the system. Go ahead, Sarah.
So for those that don't know, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and there was one relationship in particular. There were several. I remember, in trigger warning, I guess I'm about to share a personal experience. So skip through if you don't want to hear. There was this one situation where this guy, we'll just call him L, grabbed me and threw me up against a wall and started punching the wall right next to me. And I remember just freezing, right? There was no fight response there. And for the longest time, I couldn't understand why I did not try to defend myself, because after the hitting on the wall, there was a kick, I fell to the floor, then there were several kicks afterwards. And I just remember, why did I not protect myself? I just froze. And when I went to therapy, my therapist asked me, and they were like, did you? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, if you would have fought back, what would have happened? And I'm like, well, it probably would have been a lot uglier. I probably would not have survived. Like, I actually played it out in my head. And she was like, then that was probably something that your unconsciousness already kicked into place. And you were already problem solving without even realizing it, because you knew that your survival, if you responded, would have been a lot more lower than just freezing and allowing it to happen and then finding yourself in a safe situation to where you could physically remove yourself out of the situation. So I say that to tell the, to make a statement that sometimes inaction is an action. It is an action to choose to wait. And when Ellie was talking about that guilt thing, I remember having a lot of guilt, because I was like, why did I not protect myself? Why did I do that to myself? Like, that makes absolutely no sense. In reality, that was the best thing that I could have done in that situation, because if I would have fought back, because this guy 10 times bigger than me, very muscular, if I would have fought back, he would have aggressed even more. So that freeze response actually probably saved me rather than the fight response. So I just wanted to share that little personal thing.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. It's so true. We're gonna be heading into the fawn response, but soon. But when as a child, like a lot of children, fighting doesn't always seem like the best survival mechanism. Freezing can sometimes be our best bet, hoping that and hoping that things will pass. But thank you so much for bringing that up, that is us fighting for ourselves, of how we can hopefully survive the situation. Thank you so much for bringing that point up. Thank you. For the next, or the last, F is the fawn response, which is the one that I am glad to be talking about, because not a lot of people are familiar with it. But like I mentioned, it is one of my main ones. And when I learned that a lot of the way I behaved and acted derived from this, it gave me so much clarity with why I did the way I did, or why I did things the way I did. But the fawn response, just to go over the definition again. The fawn response involves seeking to please or appease others in order to minimize that threat. It often includes behaviors such as compliance, submission, and seeking approval. The fawn response is a social survival strategy and is sometimes considered an extension of the freeze response. So some physical manifestations of that can be a lot of smiling and nodding, and like agreeableness. Even if it's not like genuine, you're it's more of a making sure to try to appease. Body language of submission can also manifest here, such as like hunching shoulders, trying to make yourself feel small, avoiding eye contact, making oneself appear smaller, soft voice or apologetic tone, speaking softly, um, or trying to avoid eliciting conflicting or upsetting others. So over apologizing can also manifest here, or excessive smiling, excessive agreeability, physical tension also can sometimes manifest here too, where we're like trying to hide how we're actually feeling, or shallow breathing. And sometimes even soothing touch can manifest here too, where we're trying to like soothe ourselves or play with our hair. And sometimes going to be more of a like an obsessive way to try to manage that stress. Some of the emotional ones can manifest as like fear of rejection. The the fond response is often derived by a deep fear of rejection or being abandoned. Individuals may go into great lengths to avoid conflict that could lead to rejection. Anxiety in social situations, again, because you want others to like you, so being in social situations, we can become overly concerned with how others perceive us, difficulty saying no. Saying no can be very difficult, especially for people who function a lot in this fawn response. Difficulty setting boundaries can be in this as well, and having like low self-esteem. The fawn response is sometimes associated with like the tendency of one's own needs of worth, or needs or sense of worth, leading to like low self-esteem or constant seeking of external validation, which can lead us into like people pleasing, putting our needs last. So we tend to do whatever it takes to keep others happy, even at the expense of our own, doing anything to avoid conflict. The fawn response, we just go above and beyond to try to avoid disagreements or something that can lead into a confrontation. Self-sacrifice is one of the other ones too, where we consistently put other people's needs often to the detriment of our own. We have difficulty expressing personal desires. Our desires, needs go all the way last, because we want we want others to be happy, and feel content, so that they don't push us away or hurt us. And sometimes the lack of boundaries, again, don't know how to say no when that situation arises. The fun response to me was an eye opener. A lot of the times, especially during survival situations where I was in situations where my life was at stake, the fun response was the one that came forward the most to try to appease the person that was abusing me. But it was the hardest one to feel grace for, because a lot of the times we start to then engage in behaviors that we feel like they would want, even if it goes against our morality and we feel betrayed. But this is where, again, that compassion to understand that we are fighting for ourselves. It is just a different way to fight for ourselves. With our Jedi training, for me, the fun response kind of became the compassionate connection the fawn response, the desire to please and avoid conflict aligns with our commitment to compassion. As Jedi, we seek connection, understanding, and harmony. However, we learn to balance our desire to please with the importance of maintaining our individuality and boundaries. Um, I didn't know if other people wanted to share how the fawn response manifested within them. Like I said, that's the one I wanted to discuss the most because it actually gave me a lot of insight to and a lot of compassion to my younger self that would enter these states and didn't know why I would do it. A lot of guilt. I saw myself as a bad person for the longest time because I would engage in things that were could be seen as bad, but I've been able to learn and grow and understand that what I was doing was a form of self-preservation. I was doing things to hopefully help my abuser feel safe or appease so that I can also feel safe in that same environment to try to avoid conflict. But I'd like to open the floor to see if anybody else had any questions or wanted to share their own experience with the fawn response now that you've become that is a way that a survival mechanism that can manifest in our body. Ross, did you want to talk a little bit about it? I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that this is something that kind of gave you insight into your own.
Oh yeah. What I was gonna say is that there's a lot of like you really touch on a lot of things like fear of being abandoned. I don't know if you all know my life story, and I won't bore you all with it, but I was abandoned at birth, and so it was a lot of feeling rootlessness and insecure. And so whenever I was attached to somebody, I really tried to be so attached to them. So yeah, it was really about not disappointing them, not making them angry, um, making them feel secure, putting my needs on the back burner as opposed to their needs, you know. Yeah, and I've learned that that's my favorite, that's my go-to response. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing and opening up about that. I'm glad to know that you learned a little bit more about it. I feel like that, like I said, becoming conscious of it, becoming aware that that is a survival mechanism can allow us to foster a lot of compassion to how it manifests in our bodies for things that we've done in our past. Healing a lot of times comes from being able to forgive ourselves, either forgiving us or forgiving others. Usually healing starts with forgiveness. So I'm hoping that with learning more about how these survival mechanisms can manifest, it can give us more compassion and more tools to be understanding towards others and ourselves. Um, with with
So actually, are we going back? Can we go back to?
oh yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to point out that this actually can have a dark side to it. I can't really think of the dark side to the other ones, but this one I can, because having been a cop and having been a victim of child abuse and witnessing domestic abuse, the cycle of violence is like drilled into my head. And you can use the fawn response as a way to excuse your your abuse towards someone, because what you do is you fear losing the significant other, and so you start going with the remorse phase. This is in the remorse phase and the honeymoon phase. You justify it, and then keeping in as the victim, you get into this thing where, oh, we'll change. They said they're gonna change, and then you start justifying, oh, I did this and I'm sorry, baby, and whatnot. So there's the fawn response, in my opinion, is uh it is understood, and I understand, and like I said, give yourself grace, but also this is one of the most dangerous responses to fall into if you're not aware of how it works in your life.
I feel like that can be said with a lot of them. If you don't know how to channel our fight response, we can become aggressive towards others that we don't mean to. Flight or darkness. If you move away from conflict, you can continue to avoid and try to uh, not be present. And our freeze response, same, avoiding conflict, dissociation. My main ones, because due to the childhood trauma that I experienced, was a lot of a lot of manifestation of the freeze and fawn response during the time of the child abuse. My body or mental state would dissociate, and then the fawn response would take control of the body. But the fawn response, I think, to Allie's point, when we become in cycles of that of abuse, um, the love bombing can manifest as that form of that cycle. But thank you for bringing that up, Alice. Was there anybody else that wanted to bring up anything from the last four that might have been missed? I'm going to be heading in towards the end of the couple points that I wanted to discuss.
I just have something because I've actually never heard of the farm response, so I'm sitting here looking it up. This actually is very interesting to me. I'm gonna have to figure out why they added this in here. While I was sitting here looking into it, what popped into my head was work related, and how much I actually wonder how much, there's this one case in particular that I was doing a lot of enabling with. And I'm wondering how much of that actually has to do with this, because the farm response talks about the lack of boundaries, people pleasing, and kind of it kind of feels like a response to a certain trauma. So any type of physical and mental trauma, and I'm sure that you talked about that. I kind of was zooming in and out because of work. But that I'm going to have to look into that, because that if that is how you are responding, especially if you have some kind of history of some type of mental, physical abuse nor neglect, that farm response is probably more dominant than your other responses.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It
I
is
appreciate that you pointed that out.
It is so interesting, Sarah. I read the book because of the child abuse that I experienced. I developed complex PTSD, and learning about the fawn response and how it develops as a child and how it manifests as an adult was so eye-opening. And I even had a friend recently say that she's like, I thought this was part of my personality, and now I'm recognizing that all of these things just come from my past and how I learned to adapt to survive. And because we are social creatures, part of those trauma responses or the stress responses, we want to be loved and accepted, and sometimes even to our own detriment.
Well, yeah, and so I was sitting here, one of the biggest things is about codependency, and when you look at people with substance abuse situations, their families, it's really, really messed up. But there is a saying, I don't know if it's universal, but at least in my area, If somebody dies of drugs or alcohol, it's usually not because of the person, but because of their support system, because of all the codependency issues that are going on. And I have I grew up with this family where the woman had a drug issue. She actually was a prostitute to get her drugs, which came with a whole other slew of issues. But she had two sons who eventually ended up getting into alcohol and stuff like that. And she used to go out because it's her kids. She's like, well, I don't want them to starve to death. So they were running a drug house, like an actual crack house. And she would go out and get them food. And to make a long story short, over a period of time, she ended up having somebody try to kill her. And when she escaped herself from the situation, she had a stroke and 3 heart attacks. And then they called 911, took her to the hospital and this and that or whatever. And my mom went to go meet with her because my mom was her sponsor. And she found out what exactly was going on. And she was like, how is it that you were, doing all of this stuff? Because we all have to hit our rock bottom when it comes to substance abuse, and everybody's rock bottom is different. So what is the situation that really, really makes you look at your life and say, I can no longer do this? And then start, putting stuff into place to start getting sober and changing your life and this and that or whatever. The kids never had that because she was cushioning the fault. Her codependency issues were enabling him, or enabling both of them. Well, guess what? The one committed suicide and the other one is in prison for murder. Because in a lot of it, my mom actually sat there at the nursing home and she said, you are helping your kids kill themselves because you are not keeping your codependency issues in place. But it had to do with her initial response. I don't want my kids to hate me like I hated my parents, right? And she was doing a lot of people pleasing because she didn't want to lose her kids. She didn't want to stop talking to her kids. She didn't want her kids to, starve to death and all this other stuff. So she was playing the mother, but it actually led to their ultimate fall. And you see it very, very often in 12-step programs where there's a lot of codependency issues, which comes with a lack of boundaries, which comes with, people pleasing, and it comes with all of these slew of other issues that generally you have to end up going to therapy over and probably never, ever actually fully get rid of it. Even in your adulthood, I've been in therapy in and out of my life for 38 years. And I still have codependency issues. And it probably all stems from my childhood and, that fear of attachment, or my attachment issues and people dying and disappearing. And, I tend to not want to cross or create those boundaries because I don't want to lose those people. So that codependency enabling and all that. Okay, I'm done. But very fascinating. I love
No, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You bring a lot of good points, and I hope that with us sharing how it manifests, other people can continue to understand others. A lot of like I said, a lot of the survival mechanisms I learned from a beautiful book from Pete Walker called Complex PTSD, from going from surviving to thriving. It is a very, very good book. I also really liked The Body Keeps the Score. I carry that with me pretty much all the time here. That one's by Basil van der Kolk. But yeah, I hope that going through these survival mechanisms have allowed us to explore how some of those can manifest. So again, we can go out there with more tools with how to understand ourselves and others. There was a couple things that I wanted to go over before we end. But a few things to go forth as far as tools to help us during the way these manifest. To me, a connection to the force is one of those. In all of these responses, our connection to the force is paramount. The force is our guide, offering wisdom, strength, and clarity. By maintaining this connection, we transcend mere survival. We thrive as Jedi, bringing balance and harmony. And the force can mean a lot for different people. In this case, what was very helpful for me in my beginning of my path to force to me was my connection to my body, was the connection to my mind, learning how to listen to the wisdom that my innate wisdom that I carry was so important, and allowed me to open myself with how to connect to my ancestors and spirit guides. But as Jedi, I think that our connection to the Force is also one of the most important tools of how to use to help understand ourselves and how to connect to others. To understand, a lot of people can also, and I see it a lot in the Jedi community, a lot of empaths or people who are highly sensitive to other emotions. And I feel like that's also the part of the connection, the interconnectedness of our community of the Force. So what's also really important is the training of self-mastery. Our training involves not just lightsaber skills or martial arts, but the mastery of our minds and emotions through mindfulness, self-awareness, and disciplined practice. We arise above mere survival instincts. We become Jedi who respond with purpose, guided by the principles that define us. And also community and support is super important. Remember that as Jedi, we are not alone. Our fellow Jedi provide support, understanding, and shared experiences. And facing our survival mechanisms, we find strength in community and draw upon each other's wisdom. I'm so grateful for the Jedi community and the people that are here and present. A lot of those people have helped me through the journey of understanding myself. But by framing our survival mechanisms within the context of Jedi philosophy, we transform these responses into tools for growth, resilience, and the embodiment of the Jedi way. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. There are a couple of things that I want to also touch upon, but as far as the fight, flight, freeze response, that section is over. I did want to empower us with a couple of breathing exercises that we can take forward to help navigate when these stressors arise. These are pretty simple that we can do. One of my favorites is the box breathing. A lot of people are familiar with that. You inhale for 4, hold your breath for 4, exhale for 4, and then pause again and hold your breath for 4. So I'd like for all of us to join in collection. We talked a lot about how our survival mechanisms can manifest, and maybe that brought up some emotions, but I hope that just coming in with community to do a very basic box breathing, we can kind of maybe release some of those tensions in our body. So I'd like for everybody to get comfortable, be in a seated position, box breathing, pretty simple. We're gonna inhale for 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're gonna hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then oh wait, it's different. Inhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hold, exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you repeat that cycle for as much as you need. Allowing to control our breathing allows us to think clearly. There are a couple other techniques, but I think this one is the easiest. But there's the 4-7-4 breathing. That one is inhaling quietly through the nose for 4 seconds, and then we hold our breath for 7. Then we exhale completely through the mouth for 8 seconds, and then you just repeat that cycle. But what we're doing is by increasing the exhale, you're starting to trigger the parasympathetic response in our system that allows us to relax and go back into and to release that contracted state. Part of the breath work that I learned also was learning how to do deep breathing, basically. It's or diaphragmatic breathing. It's usually allowing breath to fill into our stomach to allow us to expand to 360, and then putting one hand over our chest and one on our abdomen so that we can really feel the breath extending from our abdomen. So we breathe in deeply through the nose, allowing our abdomen to expand. And then we exhale slowly through the mouth, feeling our abdomen our fall. And then we just continue that cycle of focusing our breaths, making them slow, deep, and rhythmic. I was hoping we would have a little bit more time to go into a breathwork session, but I don't think we're going to have time. That is something that I would like to at some point offer to the community, but I'm a little hesitant with doing it through video. But it is very powerful to do in person. I'm hoping to potentially hold more sessions in person so that I can hold space for people while they go through their journeys, because the breath work is a journey. It's an hour-long journey where we use our breath to enter states of consciousness. There's a lot of breath work that exists out there. This one, if you're curious, is through somatic release. It's a little different than, like, I think when people think of breath work, they probably think of like Wim Hof, and those the like 3 hours session. But this is a little different. You do still do the a little deep belly breathing the first half hour, where we are breathing in through the mouth and out through the mouth to expand. But it's not how fast you're doing the breath, it's about how deep you allow yourself to take in breath. So it's, and then typically there's going to be about 3 holds in between. So it's like the first 30 minutes, we're activating the body to enter in, to stress it out a little bit, because it is through the activation where it allows us to have access to potentially emotions that maybe could be trapped in our body. Expressions can sometimes be like crying or screaming, but they could be as gentle as laughing. A lot of the times the breath work is about allowing the body to finish the cycle of what it needs to feel and experience in order to finally go back to the relaxed state. Usually trauma or stress, things that we hold on to, were things that potentially we couldn't deal with at that time. So we put it back because we're people, we're busy, we have work, we have things we have to deal with, and sometimes emotions come up that we can't handle right away, so we just put it back into the back burner. But a lot of the times we don't often go back. And so even though our mind might forget why we felt a certain way, our body remembers. And that is the biggest lessons of the body keeps the score, is that our bodies have wisdom within themselves too. Even though our conscious memory might not, our trapped emotions and stress can still be in the body. So with activating the body or the system by the first 30 minutes, it hopefully brings you to those areas where or you can allow yourself to give or give yourself permission to feel what it needs to feel in order to release them and let them go, to release what no longer serves you. The last couple of ones that I went to were so beautiful. It was so beautiful to be able to hold and witness people in their authentic expressions. Like in the beginning of the workshop, I was expressing that I just lost my train of thought. At the beginning of the workshop, I don't remember what I was gonna say. But breathing itself, when we allow ourselves to feel or express, it allows us to release what is trapped in our body. So the first half of the breath work is activation to help release what might be trapped in the body. And then the second half of the breathwork journey is being able to slow down the system. So after triggering the sympathetic response, then we go into slowing down the breathing. We change our breathing from mouth to inhaling through the nose and exhaling out through the mouth. Or in or out from the nose, whatever is more comfortable. But the goal of that then is that we're elongating the exhales so that we can start triggering our sympathetic response, because the parasympathetic is what gets triggered. But once we slow down, then we can, once we slow down the system, we can now then put in what we want in place. So this is where we focus on the things that we do want to feel. So gratitude, love, peace. It is so beautiful to also, I think that's where I was gonna go. It was so beautiful to hold space for people expressing in their authenticness or their humanness. Oh, that's what I was gonna say, that we are beings that are sensitive. We are born to feel. We come into this world crying, and so our senses are overstimulated, and it's with time that we get to understand what those feel. But the longer that we don't address or know how to handle emotions, sometimes it can become super overwhelming, but sometimes we can numb ourselves to it. But the breath work itself has been very helpful for me. I've been able to access and release emotions that have been stuck within me. Sometimes I didn't even know why I was crying or laughing, but the point of the journey is not so much to be stuck in our mind, but more to allow our bodies to do what it needs to so that we can release it. And trust the wisdom of our body to help guide us in order to heal. Because most of the time, we also tend to repeat patterns. Our subconscious tends to repeat patterns, so it gives us more opportunities to repattern. So that is what the journey or the breath work, eventually with time, you start to know that when you're in an activated state, that you can go back to slowing down the system. You learn how to slow your breath, because you're now practicing from going from an elevated state to a slowed down state. But that pretty much concludes my seminar. I hope that you guys learned something today. I'm gonna be around for questions a little bit here, but that was the meat and potatoes. Thank you everybody for joining.